All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Normand. I'm a Senior Training Production Manager at Informa. I'm really delighted to welcome you today on this webinar, which will be delivered by Paul Walsh on succession planning. Before we start, I wanted to go with you through a few housekeeping rules that we have to keep in mind for the next 45 minutes. Okay. All right, so the first one would be that the slides will be available to you on a SlideShare page, and the link will be sent to you after the webinar. The same will be, we will do the same for the webinar, the recording of the webinar. You will have access to the link as well. It will be sent to you by email. Please take the time to complete the post-webinar survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. You can type your questions throughout the sessions. Don't wait until the end of the webinar to start asking your questions. You can write down your question as they come to you. However, the questions will be answered at the end. Time will be allocated by the speaker at the end of the session to address all your questions. All right, so let's start the webinar. I will now hand over the mic to Paul Walsh.
Hello everybody, hope you can hear me. And there you've got a wonderful picture of me there. Could I just first point out that I'm much more handsome in person than the picture you're seeing. But I'll leave you to read my bio and we'll get going, I think. Okay, having a little mouse problem there. The subject of the webinar today is about succession planning, and in particular I want to focus on the actual process of succession planning. Before we get there, what I've put together for you is a few slides, some of which you may be familiar with before, just to define what we're talking about when we're talking about succession planning, and a couple of models to help you decide why I in particular have gone for this particular process at the end. So I think we can all agree that succession planning is about identifying future potential leaders to fill key positions. Now, I know some of you will also be saying that it's also about critical positions outside of leadership roles, and this is absolutely correct. But for the sense of a webinar, we've only got 1 hour. I want to focus on leadership positions when it comes to succession planning. So as you can see there, what we've got is a process by which one or more successors are identified for key posts, and career moves and development activities are planned for these successors. In this area in particular, across the GCC, the number of successors seems to be settling at 2. So our target is to actually have 2 successors for each post. Again, just to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to succession planning, I hope we can all agree that this is what it's all about, a systematic approach to pipeline talent pool building and to ensure leadership continuity. I'd like to stress at this stage that succession planning, I hope you agree, is all about leadership and business continuity. There are other benefits to it, but I want to focus on the business continuity and leadership continuity side of things. I have heard various people in HR talking about introducing succession planning to retain our talent. Again, it is a short-term benefit of succession planning, but I'm sure that you're all aware of the fact that when succession planning kicks off and people start fulfilling the roles of successors, we are in danger of losing some of our talent. So we'll need plans at the end of succession planning to take care of that. Okay? So moving on, I want to be quick in this first part to give as much time as possible to the process. We recognise, of course, that some jobs are the lifeblood of the organisation and too critical to be left vacant or filled by any but the best qualified persons. My take on this is that the best qualified people for the job are already working for your company. It is far riskier to recruit somebody externally for a senior or critical position than it is to take a bet, if you like, on somebody we know, somebody we've developed, and somebody who's already demonstrated commitment and engagement to the company. When done correctly, which is where we're going with this process, succession planning is of course critical to your mission success, achieving your business plan and making sure we've got a good process for recognising, developing and retaining our top leadership talent. I'm not sure how many of you have actually seen this model before. It's a model that was devised by Mercer's 3-4 years ago, which is gaining traction in HR as a model of the way we go forward. If you look to the bottom of the slide where it says the result, this is the well-known HR mission, if you like, to ensure that we have the right people with the right skills in the right place at the right time. All the rights go into that particular thing. And Mercer's, through this model, have divided HR up into 5 different areas: our resourcing area, recruitment as you know it, total reward, you know, your compensation and benefits down there. And they've separated on the right hand side the blue and purple colours over there. Training has now been divided in 2. Employee development, pretty standard planned program of professional development, and at the top, this is the area we're concerned with here when it comes to succession planning: talent management. I want to take just a little bit of time on their definition up there. Talent management is about a clear process for identifying and bringing on high-performing talent and high-potential staff, ensuring effective resource planning. Now, of course, the resource planning they're talking about here is succession planning. And our problem has always been, and is carrying on being, is one that we do not have this clear process for identifying and bringing on high-performing talent. In many organisations, we don't even know what talent looks like. We have no definition or eligibility criteria or any kind of way of measuring the talent. You'll see from the model that performance management is the key process, the core business process for communicating performance. And this is also just not a clever jigsaw model we've thrown together to show that we've got 5 pieces. Performance management is the area of HR which actually brings all the other 4 pieces together. And as you'll know, when we're going to start trying to identify talent, there's 2 things we need. We need to know how they perform, and we also need to know have they got the potential. So performance management is a key area of HR, and it's going to help us in our succession planning. Here's something that made me laugh when I first saw it a little while ago. It's actually a quote from CIPD. It's probably 18 months old now, but I think it still has resonance. At this time, 61% of organisations had some kind of talent management department or section. Some of you may have a talent acquisition section or a talent management section down there. Now here's the thing that made me laugh. Only 20% of those organisations actually had a definition of talent. Now, how can you have a talent management department or a talent acquisition section if you haven't yet defined talent? So that's what I'll be focusing on, and it's very important in succession planning that we make sure during our process that we have a clear and absolute definition of what we're looking for. If we haven't got a strict interpretation of what talent is, how can we identify them? So I hope that you guys out there are one of the 20%, although I'm sure some of you will fall into the 41%, who have a talent management department and no definition. So let me see if I can help you with that. Here again, CIPD have come up with their definition of talent. Unfortunately, as you read it through, I'm not going to read it out to you, you'll see that really talent can be defined in many ways, and that talent means different things to different people in different organisations. So although I love the CIPD desperately, I'm afraid that here they're still leaving us a little bit in the dark. What I have for you, therefore, is brought up an example that I've seen of a company. It is in the GCC. I'm obviously not going to say who they are, but this is an example of what they say about talent. Now, I'll take you through this because I think it's important that we need to have this definition of what we're looking for when it comes to succession planning. The reason I like this particular example is that the company in question accepted some of our culture that's prevalent in the area, where we're a bit frightened of actually saying you are a talent and you are not. So this first little statement at the top, I think, is very good for the GCC. While accepting that all our employees are talented, the company recognises that some employees demonstrate outstanding potential that, if identified and developed, will add value and support, again the aim of succession planning, business continuity. So before we get into succession planning, I think it's really important for everyone out there to actually set down some criteria as to what talent is. And here's an example. Please don't cut and paste this. It may not be completely relevant for all areas of your business, but I think it's a very good setup to the kind of thing we're looking for. So in a company, somebody who is demonstrating talent will have some kind of sustained high performance. And I've put a suggestion in there, it should be 4+. I'm saying this obviously if you have a performance management scale of 1 to 5. If you have a sustained high performance of 3+, that would be fine in a performance management scale of 1 to 4. The second bullet point under the employees demonstrate criteria is recognise my colleagues, customers and management as future leaders in their field. Now I like this because as some of you are probably wondering, how do you measure this? And the way you measure this is 360-degree feedback. Now in HR, especially in the GCC, we have had a lot of resistance to 360-degree feedback, mainly from senior managers. If we can put something like this into our talent criteria, what it's telling people is that if you want to be considered talent, if you want to be considered as a succession, or a successor rather, to a successive position, then you need to be undergoing 360-degree feedback so we can measure your potential and that you're recognized as a future leader. Third point down there, consistently demonstrate our values. I'll leave that to you. What companies are working on at the moment is trying to get our values as part of our competency structure. So we've got some measures there on our values. So if we achieve that, we can start making sure that people are measured against their values. People who are talented should actually show innovation and improvement in their business area. So there's none of this, I've been sitting on my chair for 2 years, I've done the job, please promote me. We should be asking these people, what have you done that's new? What have you done that's improved? And the fourth point down there, consistently make a measurable positive impact on business performance. I consider to be absolutely vital when selecting our talent, because this is the kind of thing that talent do. They consistently make a measurable positive impact on our business performance. And of course, I hope most of you by this stage of the game in 2015 have now got fully developed leadership competencies, and people who are talented should be sustaining or indeed exceeding the leadership competencies for their job and perhaps even the job above it. I hope I'm not teaching any of you to suck eggs out there, but this model's been around also for a couple of years, the 9-box talent matrix. I've seen it in many HR departments. When I show it on my courses, people constantly say to me, yes, seen this before, Paul. My question to you today, guys, is are you using it? Because to identify talent, again, we need two aspects, performance and potential. I won't take you through the entire 9-box grid. It's pretty self-explanatory. Most of you have seen it. But what I'm looking for when I'm looking at successors are certainly the strategic few in the top right-hand corner. We're looking for people who demonstrate high performance and people who are showing high potential. Now, of course, ladies and gentlemen, that's what brings us to our problem with identifying talent and identifying possible successors. We're not very good at measuring performance, and we don't measure potential. And yet somehow some companies continue to use the 9-box matrix to identify talent when we know that we're not really properly measuring performance or potential. So without these, how do we go ahead? Now, here's what I would suggest, and here's what I recommend. I've done this a few times in different organizations. Before we get to the process itself, what can we do? We're stuck with the fact that performance management in many of our organizations is not done properly. It's not done objectively. We have no real way of measuring potential. So what we're stuck with is actually asking our senior managers their view on who's going to be their successors. So I don't think we can take this out of the process. So this is how I do it. I will have interviews with the top 2 levels of the organisation. And please, guys, do this face-to-face. Don't do it by email. And get their view on the need for succession planning and their view on both position criticality and position vulnerability. Now, I know many of you have tried to do this in the past, and what I would really recommend to you guys is don't have any arguments with directors about position criticality. It's actually a pointless question to say to people, is your job critical? We know what they're going to say, and nobody's going to put themselves out of a job by saying my job isn't critical. What I would focus on here is the position vulnerability. In other words, does this position have a successor, and a successor who's ready to take over immediately? And that's what I'd focus on. What we're looking for is positions in the organisation where there is no available successor. Whether or not they're critical is a subjective decision made by directors who all think their jobs are critical. So I'd leave that one alone. When I've done the interviews and got the information, I then put together a first draft. You've probably seen this before as well, but I find it useful in mapping out where we are. We measure criticality, low, medium and high. People have asked me how you measure criticality. I tend to do it on dollars. In other words, I ask the question, if people leave your organisation, how much does it cost you? What's the business impact? If our director of sales leaves, how much revenue are we going to lose? See if we can measure it along those terms. Very difficult thing to do. It can also end up being subjective, but that's the kind of thing we can look at. The vulnerability is a lot easier to measure, I feel, between low, medium and high. So what we've got is if people already have a successor that can jump into their chair straight away, well, obviously the vulnerability is low. What I'd suggest, if somebody's got a successor who's not quite ready yet, but will be ready within a year, that would be a medium type vulnerability. And if we haven't got a successor anywhere at all, well, then it's high vulnerability. As I say, what I'm looking for, especially amongst the senior managers, is vulnerability rather than criticality. It takes away a lot of the politics. The next step that I take, and I try to present this kind of thing to the CEO or at least the C officers in the organisation, is I'll take one part of the organisation, this example is the commercial management organisation, and show them what it looks like. You'll see we've got some interesting characters in this particular organisation. And if you look down the left-hand side there, we have different things which appear in all organisational charts. Our marketing director at the moment is an acting position. Happens to be Robert De Niro. He's pretty good at acting. We also have some vacant positions around there. And by the way, if a position is vacant, I mark it as high vulnerability. If it's vacant, we obviously haven't got a successor in the building to take the place. You'll also see, as you move from the left-hand side, the second tree on that organisational chart. There's also some strange things in there. We have a regional manager, for example, who reports direct to the chief commercial officer, who happens to be Al Pacino. When I've shown them that and asked them for their agreement, this is how their particular department organisation works, I then take the information that I've gathered from their interviews and I then paint the organisational chart to show them what their succession situation actually looks like. And it usually looks like this. A minority of positions will actually have a successor who's ready now. That's come out as blue on this screen. We've got some positions down there who are coming out orangey yellow. In other words, we've got a successor but not ready yet, ready in perhaps 1 to 3 years. And red is no internal successor whatsoever. I would stress that this chart and this colour code doesn't say anything at all about criticality. I'm concentrating purely on vulnerability here. Now when the C officers in particular and the CEO sees this, the kind of silly questions they ask is, where did you get this information from? And I tell them that I got it from you. I got it from them following interview. Because again, my experience and what people and delegates tell me all the time is that when they ask the question of directors, do you have a successor, their automatic answer is no, I don't. So don't run away from this information you've been given with directors. Without being rude, throw it straight back at them. Paint their organisation, paint their department how they've told you to paint it. So this organisation here is telling me that within our senior management structure we have got 11 positions where there is no successor available. Now, will this cause problems to business continuity? That's a decision and an evaluation that you, the CEO, and perhaps the C-suite officers will have to make. But I personally would see any organisation that has an organisation chart that looks like that needs help. They're under threat. If nothing else, they can be held ransom by the position holders who will say, there's no one to replace me, please give me a pay rise. It is not a healthy position for a company to be in. It's not a healthy position for HR to be aware of. And although it does seem a little bit gimmicky to run through this procedure, to have interviews and then paint organisational charts, it works. Believe me, it works. The questions that the CEO will ask C officers and directors after seeing this is basically, what have you been doing for the last 2 or 3 years? So, after thinking about this for many years and consulting on the matter and actually introducing succession planning into a few companies, we came up against these problems all the time. How are we going to find our successors and make sure that they truly are eligible, that they truly are good performers, they truly are good potential? Because in this part of the world in particular, although let me be clear, it does exist all over the world, influence, networking, friendships, relationships, call it WASTA, call it whatever you like, exists. So if we depend solely on the succession position holder to nominate the successor, we can never be sure that the person he's nominating is in actual fact the right person for the job. So what I've come up with for the criteria to be transparent is there must be an element of external assessment. We've got to take some of the decision making for successors out of the organisation and allow a trained professional external assessor to give his or her objective analysis of whether this person is a potential leader of your company. So here, at last, we've got to the process itself. I think the best way we can do this is, those of you who are well aware of flowcharts and well aware of process maps will realise straight away that this is a very high-level process map. I've taken it right from the nomination process right through to the placement of the successor. And each of these boxes, as most of you will be aware, could be exploded and have their own little flowchart within it. But just at a very high level, have a look at how this works. I've tried desperately, and I hope some of you are laughing, I've tried desperately to get the line director out of the process altogether. Unfortunately, politically, we can't do that. The line director has to be involved in the process. After all, he or she is going to be responsible for coaching, hopefully, making sure that acting takes place, developing, mentoring the successor. So we can't leave the line director out of the process. So my first step in the process would be asking the line director to actually nominate a successor. Now remember, we've done this informally with an interview, but now it's going to be a formal nomination. My experience has told me that although the organisational chart I painted red and yellow and green, when we actually formally ask them after they've seen the chart, suddenly successors start appearing within their department. So we asked the successor to nominate, we asked the line director to nominate a successor. We also, if you look at the red lined box on the left hand side, we asked the director to supply succession position and readiness. So ask them to give some kind of estimate when they're ready. Are they ready now? Are they ready in 1, 2, 3? I'm not too sure about 4 years, but I'll leave that to your company. On the right hand side then, what we're going to do to help the director make his or her nomination is to give them a set of eligibility criteria. Now this could be similar to the example I showed you before, sustained high performance of 4+, good 360-degree feedback from people and that kind of thing. Or it could be many other things that you want to do. Again, each organisation has got to decide what's best for itself and choose good, strong, and may I stress, objective eligibility criteria. In other words, anybody who's nominated has got to meet the eligibility criteria dictated by HR. So no exceptions, please. I know the word exception is a good word that we use in HR quite a lot. You know, we have a policy, but people are individuals. We should allow exceptions. When it comes to succession planning, no exceptions. Draw up your eligibility criteria, send it to the line director. Anybody he or she nominates must meet the eligibility criteria, otherwise they're out. Next step of the process, I've said let's send it to the Head of People Development, which by the way is a wonderful title. I prefer that to Head of Training or anything else. Head of People Development, in other words, the person who's going to be monitoring, reviewing and actually working the succession plan within your organisation. His or her job is quite simple. Make sure that we check the eligibility criteria. Now I've put in there English ability. This is something that many people have asked me to put in to the process. And again, I'll leave it for you and your type of organisation. But it does seem to be in this part of the world, and I'm sorry about this, guys, it does seem to be that if you're heading for a top leadership position in an organisation, then good English ability is absolutely essential. I do apologise, I'm sorry, we won that argument. If you're unsure, we can also get people to assess their English ability, but I'm sure you've gone through this kind of thing before. Now, when the nominations have been checked, we've got people who are eligible to be a successor. We've checked everything we need to check. Here comes the thing which I think is the absolute crucial point of the succession plan process. Candidates sent for external assessment. Now what we're doing is we're doing two things. Number one, we're validating the decision or the nomination of the line director, but we're also getting lots and lots of good information about the people we're sending. Now what you're going to assess them on, again, depends on you and your organisation. Obviously a key way of measuring potential is to see how people are performing on competencies compared to their job level. So we'd be looking for people who are performing at perhaps 1 or 2 levels above their competency level for their needed position. We may also want to assess them, of course, on any leadership behaviours, any leadership competencies that you may have. We may throw in English there as well. I'm not going to mention any external assessors. You all know the good ones. We've got some good ones here in the GCC now. I'll leave you to choose it. But make sure that you sit down with them and be very, very strong about what you want people to assess. Now you'll notice on the process I have a little red asterisk by the external assessor, and this is one that you've got to fight for, guys, because it's well worth it. If you go down to the very bottom left of the slide, you'll see what this asterisk refers to down there. I would strongly recommend that for your initial succession trawl, that initially you send all locals, grade 2 to 5, and again, I don't know your grading structure. What I'm talking about is basically the top 4 levels of the organisation. All locals, so your Emiratis, your Kuwaitis, your Omanis, wherever you may be, get them externally assessed. Now, our reason for doing this is to identify high potential locals who have not been identified by the line. In other words, we're just going to back up what the line director has said and make sure no WUSTA has been used. It's a catch-all. I've focused on locals. I focused on Emiratis, Kuwaitis, Saudis, wherever you happen to be. If in your organisation perhaps you're not meeting your nationalisation targets or you're just not attracting enough, perhaps you might want to include some expats in there. What I'd suggest is you could send people for external assessment who do meet the eligibility criteria but have not been nominated by their boss. In this way, we're making sure that we're catching everybody. Now, I'm pretty sure your line directors, your bosses, are not actually going to like this catch-all, because it seems like we're questioning their decisions. And the answer is, yes, we are. And it needs to be done. And when this is communicated rather to everyone in your organization about how we're actually doing things, you guys in HR are going to get a huge pat on the back, because you're making it open, you're making it fair, you're making it transparent. It's an essential part of any succession planning process. If your process does not have an element of external assessment, I'm afraid you're not making big movements forward. I'm sure I'm going to get lots of questions on that, which I'll answer at the end of the webinar. After the external assessment, a decision will be made by the assessors. Now, I've put it down here as a decision of ready or not ready. Different assessors will use different things to express it. Let's look on it as a pass and a fail. People are coming out of the external assessment. Some of them will have done well at the assessment, and as you know, those of you who have had experience with external assessors, they'll also come out with a huge report which gives them their development action to bring them up to the desired level. These people we can congratulate, tell them, put them into the succession pool, ready for their further succession development. Now, the people who come out the external assessment who are not ready yet, who have perhaps just scraped past their own competencies at their own job position level, we've got to be ready for these guys. Although they're not ready, we've got to be ready. Obviously, they need some kind of career development plan. They need something. They might need mentoring. They might need counselling as well. But these are guys who have gone to an external assessment, and no matter how they perform, they're not showing any potential for growth. And we need to be very strict with this. So we need to have something within that career development plan to make sure that they don't all resign en masse and that we can look after them. Although if you want my personal opinion, some of them should be allowed to resign. When I've showed this process in the past, people have said to me that it's too tight, and that the people who are not ready yet, there perhaps should be another arrow leading from the career development plan going back into the external assessment. So in other words, if they've been but they weren't up to scratch, give them some development, and perhaps in 1 year's time or 2 years' time, give them another go at external assessment. And I'd welcome your suggestions on that, what you think of allowing people to have another go. It may be a bit too hawkish to actually say one go and you're out. So I'd welcome your suggestions on that, guys. The rest of it, I think you probably are aware of. I'll run through it just to see where we are. The people who are ready, they've been through an external assessment, they'll come out with some kind of development action. You'll know what behaviours they're good at, what behaviours they need to strengthen, and there's all kinds of things you can use there. The red box on the right hand side. They may need some leadership training, although remember we're looking at fairly high up the organisation, and I would expect that many of them have done the leadership training that they perhaps need to have. We might need to reinforce it a little bit. I've mentioned ILM in there. That's just one of many leadership course providers that you can have a look at. But in my experience, the development plans for our successors, number one, it's not expensive. And it's mostly about on the job. What we're looking at is fast track stuff, coaching, acting, mentoring, stretch assignments, that kind of work. Again, in my experience, succession pool candidates, they don't need a lot of formal training. They've probably had it already. What they need is a feel for the next job. They need to be able to do it. So they need to be coached by the person who's holding the position. They need to be allowed to perform acting while the position holder is on holiday, sick, or wherever else he might be. This, I know, is going to cause you problems. We're not going to solve those problems today. But we've been talking about coaching for years and years and years, and you know and I know there are senior managers who just refuse to do it. We're going to have to introduce some kind of system, some kind of process, some kind of log, development plan, whatever, to make sure that coaching, acting and mentoring does take place. As the succession development progresses, eventually it will be time for an annual candidate review, the next box down. By the way, guys, this coffee tastes fantastic. Annual candidate review should be held by HR and the line manager, and obviously there we talk about his or her performance while they were acting, how the succession development is going, have they had the necessary coaching, is there any other development they feel that they need as a result of doing this kind of thing, and we make a decision here. Following their development, are the guys now ready to take up a position? If they are, they've done their development, everybody's happy with the way they've performed, we can put them into the ready pool. They're ready to take up the position. Some people will come out of the annual candidate review, they've done a bit, they've progressed, but they're still not ready. So back they go for some further succession development until they themselves are ready. I've got another red box under there. Candidates failing to make the required improvement to be removed from the succession pool. Now again, I do get some people actually arguing with me about this and saying, oh come on Paul, once they're on, they're on. I don't think this is right. What happens with some people, and I will stress it is a minority of people, is they're told they're a successor and then they lay back on their laurels and get a little bit lazy. They believe that the position, their future is guaranteed, and perhaps they don't properly fulfill their succession development, their performance starts to slack off a little bit. And to me, if that comes up at the annual candidate review, that they haven't done their succession development, I would be inclined to take them off the succession pool. Get them off there, send a lesson out to everybody else. I had experience of this with one guy who, there was no doubt about it, the guy was very talented indeed. He turned up for an annual candidate review, and when asked to see his succession development plan, he said he didn't have time for it this year. I asked him a couple of times, excuse me, I thought I'd gone a little bit deaf, and he says, no Paul, I didn't have time for it this year. And I took him off the list immediately. The line manager was furious with me because this guy was obviously talented and said, why'd you do that? And all I'll ask you guys to think of is, when was the last time you heard a CEO say, I haven't got time for that? They don't say it. The successors that we're trying to develop are people who are going to take up future senior management, director, C officer roles. One of them may possibly be a CEO in the future. Get them out of the habit of saying, I haven't got time for this, because your senior managers shouldn't be saying that. So, having gone through all that nastiness, we're now ready to look at people who are in the ready pool. Each of you in your own organisation are going to have to make a decision about this. I believe strongly that despite people having gone through the external assessment, having their succession development and gone through annual candidates review, still need to go through our normal selection process when a vacancy comes up. I've said on the red box on the side there, normal selection procedure has to apply because there is no guarantee of position. Now let's be honest, just between the few of us, I know this won't go any further. When you introduce succession planning and your first senior position comes up, of course we're going to do everything in our power to make sure a successor gets it. In actual fact, it would be quite silly if a successor did not get the post. But it needs to be open, transparent and fair, and communicated to the rest of the organisation that despite all this development, there is no guarantee. Our successors will have to go through the process. What we've done, of course, with our succession development is we've given our successors every possible advantage possible to get that position, and it would be a big surprise if they didn't. But let's keep it open and honest. Okay, guys? Hopefully, eventually, the successor will take up position, and you will have begun the process of changing the leadership, the culture, and the direction of your company. I wish you every absolute success with it. One final point I'm going to make is communication of the policy, communication of the process, and communication of the actual names of the successors. Some organisations in the GCC are going through a process and trying to keep it secret. My opinion on that is it's going to fail. It's going to fail. Normally when we're looking at successors, we're looking at anything between 35 to 40 people. You cannot keep it secret. How can we train somebody to be a director without telling them that we're training them? How can we keep it from the eventual position that this person is going to fill? It can't be done. So rather than keep it confidential, I actually do the complete opposite. What I do is, after the external assessment, after we've mentored and coached and given a career development plan to those who are not successful, I actually communicate the whole thing. I put a big thing out in the organisation saying, here are our successful successors. Here's the people who have jumped through hoops to become the future leaders of our organisation. Have a party, invite the CEO, and get him to have some recognition. You may also wish to consider that people who have gone through this process and are about to do quite a big succession development may deserve some monetary reward as well, some kind of allowance while they're on it. But I'll leave that to you. Keep it open, keep it transparent, make sure there's external assessment, and I now welcome any suggestions, questions, or anything you wish to say. If you have any questions, please make sure that you type them in the question box, and I'll do my best to get back to you.
All right, everyone, if you don't have any questions right now, if you have any questions after the webinar that come to your mind, please write. Oh, I can see there's something that came up. Hold on. Oh, here.
Hello guys, you probably guessed I'm new to this webinar nonsense. Here we are, we're getting some questions through now. Somebody's asked a question, or made a statement rather, that I'm not sure organisations and their leaders are ready or mature enough for this approach. I tend to agree with you, and I also would like to suggest that it's our job in HR to develop people until they're mature enough to get it. Keep communicating it across. If we kind of give up on this and say that our culture or our immaturity amongst our organisations is stopping us from doing what's best, then I think that's a wrong approach. You make an assessment of the maturity of your organisation. If it is immature, then what we might do is actually extend the timeline for the implementation of succession planning. If they're against external assessment, if they're against any kind of verifying of their decisions, then your succession planning is going to fail anyway. So put it off while we educate, develop and inform people the best approach. We want to know whether we can get the recorded session and the related slide. Yes, you can. I'm surrounded by women here who are telling me that they will get this off to you as soon as possible and send forward links and things like that to you. I've got a question here from Beverly. I can't see all the question at the moment. Hi, Beverly, you're hiring 3 times a year because you're in education, I assume, and it's becoming pretty hectic. Yes, you're probably not going to like this. It's temporary consultants. It can be overwhelming trying to do an awful lot of recruitment over 3 stages. Now, there's certain things that we should be able to predict. You know, if you're in academia, if you're in a university or a college, you know without me telling you, Beverly, that you know when people are going to leave. They're going to leave at the end or just before the summer term. Okay, so what we have to do with succession is a kind of a short-term succession. Can we identify people down there? There are certain industries, like in academia, pilots, doctors, where it's very difficult to actually fast-track somebody into a post. They have to do the time through. So if you'd like to leave it, Beverly, I can come back to you with a more detailed answer. Interesting question here. Do you have any example with GCC where you witnessed success that made it all the way to the top? I do have an example. He's not CEO yet, but he's gone from a manager right through to the C-suite officers, and it's actually an example from Oman where that's happening. Somebody's telling me I'm doing a good job. Thank you very much indeed. That's it? Yep. Okay. Last thing to Beverly out there, I don't think I answered your question as well as I could. Can she still type stuff in here? Yeah, Beverly, if you want to give me a little bit more of a detailed question, I'll try and get back to you with a better answer. Okay. Thank you all very much, and it's 5:15. Go home. See you soon, I hope.